to the 30-day novel, NaNoWriMo series. Today is day 23. My name is Lynn Johnston, and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. As always, we want to ask first of all, how are you going to move your story forward today? Today, your characters are going into, or your protagonist and his or her allies are going into the dark moment. The dark moment is the point in the story where the protagonist and his or her allies have suffered a terrible defeat, or a Pyrrhic victory that feels like a defeat, or some sort of situation that basically makes them feel like, oh my gosh, there's no way we can get to our goal. And for a moment, they lose hope. This is the point where your protagonist questions everything. They question whether or not they were crazy to even start this journey. They question whether or not they've really grown. They may question whether or not the growth that they've definitely made has been for the better. They may think like, oh my gosh, I was better off before I even started this and got involved in this mess, and it was crazy for me to think that I could change the world or become a better person or save the person that I'm supposed to be saving or stop the antagonist from doing something evil. And this is the moment where your protagonist is full of questions and the answers all seem to be, you're an idiot. And of course, we're not going to stay here very long. This is going to be a small point of the story, but your protagonist needs to hit this lowest point. This is his or her rock bottom before he or she pulls themselves together and goes after the antagonist in a do or die attempt. So for your protagonist, why does your protagonist believe that this is the final defeat? Why does your protagonist temporarily give up? What has your protagonist been placing faith in that they can no longer have faith in because of this defeat? What questions is your protagonist asking him or herself about his beliefs, about his or her worldview? He thought or she thought the world was a particular way, and that whatever he or she is trying to do is possible, and now it's looking like the world is saying, nope, that is not for you. You can also ask yourself, how does this defeat make the protagonist feel that the growth that they have undergone during the course of the story was in vain? Does the protagonist feel like, well, okay, I'm totally screwed, but at least I'm going to die a better person? Is your protagonist angry that he or she didn't manage to change soon enough in order to win? Is your protagonist blaming his or herself? Or whatever it is that he or she believed in? This is like where your protagonist is really, if your protagonist loses at one place in the story, this is it. And it doesn't have to be like a melodramatic, sobbing, total mental breakdown. If your protagonist is a very tough person who's very emotionally shut down, this might be your protagonist simply not being able to have conversations with people and being really guilty and blaming him or herself and having some interior monologue that just basically makes it clear to the reader that he or she no longer believes in what they believed in before. So it doesn't have to be this huge, sobbing, melodramatic. It doesn't have to be a mental breakdown. It doesn't have to be like the crazy fight where they just hurl accusations at everybody they care about. Although it could be. It depends on your protagonist and how they would handle this kind of a falling apart of their entire lives. So think about how you've set up your protagonist, and more importantly, think about how you've set up your growth arc. This is the point where your protagonist may backslide. This is the point where your protagonist may feel like, I should have stayed selfish because if I'd been looking out for myself, I wouldn't be where I am right now. This may be the point where the protagonist is saying, gosh, if I had just figured out how to be more selfless sooner, I would have saved the people who just died for me in an attempt to help me defeat the antagonist or to achieve the goal I'm trying to achieve. So think about what happened in the second pinch point and think about what you're trying to show about your protagonist and their growth, and kind of craft your dark moment around that. Because remember, there needs to be something your protagonist loses faith in, which could be themselves or something bigger than themselves, and then they're going to need to regain that faith. There's going to have to be something shortly after the dark moment that triggers the protagonist to regain hope. So think about the fact that you're going to have to trigger the protagonist to pull out of this dark moment while you structure the dark moment itself. So, talking about the other characters in your story, do your protagonist allies also lose hope, or do some of them manage to retain hope in spite of the apparent hopelessness of the situation? Also, do any of your protagonist's allies lose hope so deeply that they abandon the protagonist? You might also want to think about how your antagonist and your antagonist allies are feeling after having won this apparent victory over the protagonist. And chances are that's not going to be as much of a part of the big moment, although your antagonist may gloat or rub it in, or maybe maybe your antagonist is doing something awful to the protagonist, taking advantage of them or taking them prisoner, or banishing them from the realm, something like that. And it's okay for the antagonist not to be in the dark moment. The focus in the dark moment should be on the protagonist and their loss of faith. But you do always want to know what your other characters are doing, and especially the antagonist. The antagonist just experienced a victory, so they're going to be doing something, whether it's moving forward with their own plans or celebrating or lording it over the protagonist. Whatever it is your villain would do, make sure that is something you're aware of, even if it doesn't actually show up on the page during the dark moment, because it is going to affect what happens later. For example, after your protagonist regains hope again, maybe the antagonist's forces are all drunk from celebrating or hungover, and that makes it easier for the protagonist to attack during the climax. So looking at the conflict for your story, do the protagonist and their allies retreat, or get stranded, or get captured by the antagonist? Are they left for dead? What's happening during this dark? What happens during this dark moment, and what happens to trigger the dark moment? It's going to be some sort of conflict, and it's conflict that's falling out of the second plot point. Also, do any of the third parties involved take advantage of either the protagonist and their allies' weakened position? This could be anything from crows coming in to prey on the bodies of the dead, people looting the battlefield. It could be the weather, could just be screwing everything up, and someone comes in and takes advantage of the cover of the thunderstorm to come in and steal your protagonist's supplies, whatever supplies remain. Basically, this is a point where your protagonist is down, and you kind of want to kick him. You don't want to do that in real life, kick people when they're down, but your dark moment, this is the point where your protagonist just suffers every blow you can possibly give him, to make him lose faith and to make him give up or want to give up. You can also ask yourself, what do the antagonist forces do to the defeated protagonist and their allies, if anything? Could be putting them in a dungeon, could be torturing them, could be ignoring them. You may not be writing a story that has like an epic scale. Maybe basically what your antagonist does is goes off and dances with the protagonist's girlfriend, and gloats a little while the protagonist is sitting there thinking, I'm never going to get her back. I have screwed up so badly. So whatever was going on in your second plot point, this is the point where you want to look at all the conflicts that are going to arise around the protagonist giving up hope. Looking at your setting, how is your setting working to your antagonist's advantage? The antagonist should have the upper hand during the dark moment. So how is the setting helping him or her? And how is the setting making your protagonist's hopelessness more believable? How does the setting also look like it might be stacked against the protagonist? And this includes, when I say setting, I'm always talking about not just the physical environment that your protagonist moves through, but all the very minor characters who are perhaps not important enough to have a name or be singled out to the reader to have a personality, but they're there. It could be like a faceless mob that is rioting that your protagonist gets swept up in. It could be like a faceless crowd that's watching your protagonist completely fail in the talent competition that they were determined to win. Depending on what kind of story you're telling, setting can include a lot of different types of people. So look at how the nameless, faceless masses and the people who are not important enough to really focus on who they are, but they're still there in the background, include them in your setting when you're looking for conflict and ways to make your protagonist situation more hopeless. It could just be like the protagonist overhearing two other girls whispering a rumor about her behind her back. We don't need to know those girls' names. We just need to know that people are talking. And that's part of your protagonist setting. Talking about story promise, what are you going to promise the reader about the climax of your story? This is a point that is pivotal in your character's growth arc, because coming out of the dark moment is basically requiring your protagonist to embrace the better self that they are trying to become. So right now, in this dark moment, you are basically foreshadowing and promising the reader that there is going to be a point in the climax where your protagonist is going to choose between whoever they are in this dark moment and whoever they potentially could be as their best possible selves. And again, like I said before, you probably already have an intuitive feel for this. And if you're not sure how to make this moment foreshadow the choice or dilemma that your character is going to face at the climax, don't worry about it. Just write it. Just let your protagonist be as hopeless as you can make them. And when you're coming back to edit, you can look at what you've written and look at what you've written in the climax and start to look for parallels there. Put it in edits. You can always add things in edits, and your reader cannot tell when they look at the finished product what was in your first draft and what you added later. Getting started, as always, do your pre-writing ritual and your pre-writing exercise. Do whatever you need to do to get immersed in your story world. Dress up like your villain. Dress up like one of your characters. Put on the special hat that you only wear when you're writing. Whatever you need to do to get into that mindset, do that. And I just want to remind you that the dark moment isn't your protagonist's ultimate defeat. But it needs to feel that way. It needs to feel during the scene that you write today where your protagonist is accepting that they have screwed up or that they have lost something that's irreplaceable or otherwise have lost hope in their quest. You need to really make sure that it feels that way. If you hold back during the dark moment, you're actually depriving your reader of that awesome, triumphant feeling that comes from a successful climax, because the dark moment being right before the climax is the contrast for that amazing feeling that the reader gets at the end of your book. And you want emotionally the reader to come as far as they possibly can between the dark moment and the climax of your story, when the protagonist finally defeats their antagonist and achieves their goal. It's like, if the dark moment is just slightly hopeless, that makes the climax feel less triumphant. So you want there to be as much contrast as you can possibly put in there. As awesome as you want the reader to feel at the end of the story, you want them to feel that terrible during the dark moment. After you write, please always celebrate your progress. Do what you need to do to make tomorrow easy. If you haven't been keeping your desk clean, or you haven't been getting your writing tools together so that they're in a backpack ready to go to the cafe, give it a chance. Do it tonight. Just take 5 minutes. Even if it's just 5 minutes at looking at the scene that you're going to write tomorrow and writing 3 things that you know are going to happen in that scene. Or writing a note to yourself saying, make sure that tomorrow's dark moment, the protagonist thinks about his dead mom. Just do something to make it easier for yourself to get into your story tomorrow and to be ready to write. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Happy writing, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.